And we're back for another episode of Standpoint. I am Gabe Groisman, and I am so excited to have with me today Bruce Blakeman. Bruce is the Nassau County Executive. You've seen him all over the news in this past week, and obviously in the past as well. He's got a long history in New York politics in particular. We'll get into that a little bit. This past week, which is the reason why I invited Bruce to come on the pod to talk about it. Bruce passed the nation's first mask ban, in really municipal mask ban or countywide mask ban called the Mass Transparency Act. We'll get into it, making it illegal for people to wear masks in public if their intent is to conceal their identity, really as a response to the rampant chaos that we've seen on the streets. There have been protests, riots, violence all over the country, and local executives, local mayors, governors, et cetera, have been wrestling with different ideas of how to tackle that. And Bruce has really come up with an innovative thing. But first, welcome, Bruce, to the show. Thanks so much for doing it.
Thank you so much, Gabe, and thank you for your activism. It's very refreshing to see a young leader like you doing so many great things. So thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I'm struggling. My oldest daughter turns 18 in a couple months, so the young thing is starting to wear on me. But it is what it is. It's better than the alternative. But actually, before we get into the situation that's happening all over the country and how you responded to it, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that you were the commissioner of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey from June 2001 to 2009, which means you were the commissioner on 9/11. I know that you had really a close call. You were supposed to be there that morning. I was reading some reports about it. You decided to take your son to school instead. But tell me a little bit about what it was to be the commissioner of the Port Authority, for those that don't know, the landlord of the World Trade Center and so much more that was based there in the World Trade Centers.
Well, I also lost my nephew that day. My nephew was an Army veteran. He was a volunteer firefighter, and he was also a New York State court officer. So when the call went out for all hands on deck to evacuate the Twin Towers, he was in the South Tower in the lobby helping a woman who was severely burnt, and the building collapsed on him. We never got his body. We never got any DNA. All we had was his pistol and his shield, his badge. So it was very, very tough time for my family. Plus, I had to go to over 30 funerals and speak on behalf of the governor because Governor Pataki couldn't go to all the funerals. There were so many of them. There was just with firefighters, police officers, and court officers, there was over 400 funerals that he had to try to attend, and he couldn't attend them all. So it was a really terrible time. But it was also a time where I learned a lot about leadership and making decisions. And we had to act in a way that would secure all of our assets. All of the Port Authority assets are high interest terrorist targets. So I was vice chair of the security committee, had to work with securing all of our assets. And then, of course, dealing with all the tragedy and all the death. And then the rebuilding, the renewal. And I was part of that process of rebuilding the site, putting up the memorial, building the Freedom Tower, and rebuilding the neighborhood. So it was a time where I got a lot of experience in leadership. I learned a lot about how to deal with sorrow. And, losing a member of your family at age 26 is 26 years old. My nephew was just married, and he was a real hero. And so it was very difficult. But I just want to say to everybody that is listening or watching, do not forget what happened on 9/11. It's going to be 22 years, and we're seeing a lot of the same things. We're seeing what terrorism brings. It brings nothing but death and destruction. Look at the October 7th attack on Israel, which was a pure act of terrorism, killing innocent people, burning babies, beheading babies, raping women, kidnapping people. These people are vicious, they're evil, and we can't forget those lessons, and we have to fight vigilantly every day to make sure that we weaken our enemies, Israel's enemies, and the enemies of people who are moral and just and good.
Look, there's a reason why I'm drawn to you, Bruce. We've only met a couple times, but I think so similarly. And it's only been 22 years, 23 years, and I was a senior in college on 9/11, but in the conscience of our nation, it seems to have totally disappeared. Today, we have people marching on the streets in support of terror organizations, whether it's Hamas or even Al Qaeda. And when those of us that are standing up against in favor of the West and supporting the West, Israel, the United States, and the alliance, and against terrorism, we're really met with this entire, it's like a brick wall where they don't want to hear facts. They don't want to understand that now they're coming for Israel, but they'll come for the U.S. next. And in fact, they came for the U.S. first in some occasions. And really, that's really what brings me to what you did with the Mass Transparency Act, because we've been seeing these protests, and I hate calling them protests, because when they're protests, there's no problem, right? But when they get violent, and when people talk about free speech, this isn't about speech, it's about conduct. It's about what they're doing. And when you're burning flags, attacking businesses, attacking people, attacking police officers, it's no longer about speech at all. It's about conduct, and we need to protect our residents. So tell me how this came about, how this Mass Transparency Act came about, and what it is.
Well, first of all, Nassau County has just been named the safest county in America because we got a great police department, and I invest in our police department. I've hired 200 new police officers in the last 2 years alone, and I'm continuing to hire. We're the 12th largest police department in the United States. And when I talk with one of our legislators, who you're very familiar with, Mazi Pilip, who represents the Great Neck, New Hyde Park area of Nassau County, she came to me and she said, people in her community were saying, why are these people allowed to wear masks? And I said, Mazi, that's a very good question. She said, we should ban them. So I asked her if she spoke with the Speaker of the Legislature, Presiding Officer Howard Coppell, about it. She said she would. He was supportive. I was supportive. And it went before the county legislature. And unfortunately, it was only Republicans that voted for it. We had 12 Republicans that voted for it. Sadly, we had 7 Democrats who abstained. They were cowards. They didn't even have the courage that if they opposed it to vote against it, they abstained, which basically is a vote against it. So Mazi Pilip, I think, deserves a lot of credit for bringing this matter to my attention. I signed the bill the other day, and people that I meet from all walks of life, every race, religion, and ethnic group, they are congratulating us for doing it because it's just common sense. And it's not just all of the anti-Semitism, which obviously is very important. We saw what happened at Columbia University. We've seen what's happened in other places around the country where they use masks to hide their identity so they can harass and hurt Jewish people. It's also a law and order issue. They use masks to shoplift. They use masks to carjack. They use masks to rob banks. And my police department was very, very enthusiastic about this bill. They said it's another tool in the toolbox for them to keep this county safe. So it served a lot of purposes. It's common sense. People should not wear a mask unless there's a religious imperative or they have a health condition. And they should not try to hide their identity like the Ku Klux Klan did back when they were harassing and committing acts of violence, including murder and lynchings against African American people. They banned hoods then. We're banning masks now.
Yeah, it's incredible the divide that we're seeing in our country when it comes to these protests in the DNC that's happening now. They keep nodding towards the protesters, talking about how they have a point, et cetera. Biden said that, and everybody, that's sort of, they don't know what to do with him. Whereas it's really a public safety issue more than anything. And so many county executives, so many mayors, so many governors are afraid to use their police in an offensive manner and sort of let's wait on the side until the buildings are burning and only then come in. And DC is a perfect example because in DC, when the Prime Minister of Israel was speaking and the protest broke out outside of Union Station, they were attacking police officers, harassing people that were walking by, burning American flags, defacing monuments, and the police did absolutely nothing. All that happened is the next day they cleaned everything up and they were so proud of themselves that they cleaned up. But what about the public safety? I actually have an office a few blocks away from Union Station. No one can get out of the office because they didn't want to walk through the violent protest. So you obviously have a different approach on law enforcement. Let
let me explain that to you, Gabe. Thank you for bringing that up. And I was at Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech in Congress, which I thought was an incredibly powerful speech, probably one of the best speeches he's ever given. And that's saying
Agreed.
something because he's quite the orator. But in Nassau County, we had the same protesters, the same group, the same anarchists, the same pro-Palestinian, so-called pro-Palestinian crowd that is funded by the Communist Party, the same ones that occupied buildings at Columbia University, blocked bridges, blocked highways, blocked airports in New York City and around the country. And they came to Nassau County. They came to the 5 towns when we had one of our synagogues was hosting a real estate in Israel night where they had people from Israel come in and show them real estate if they were looking for a second home in Israel, of which I signed a contract for a second home in Israel myself. But our
Nice.
police handled it very differently, Gabe. Our police officers were given instructions by me and our police commissioner as follows. People who want to exercise their right to free speech, they're welcome in Nassau County. We gave them a designated area to protest. They had to stay in that area. My instructions were as follows. If someone steps off the sidewalk, you politely tell them to get back on the sidewalk. If they do not, you arrest them. No ifs, ands, or buts. No blocking highways, no occupying buildings, no occupying bridges. We will not tolerate that in Nassau County, and that's why we don't have a problem. You only have a problem when you embolden these terrorists to commit acts of harassment and violence. And you're absolutely right. They waited till buildings were occupied. They waited until bridges were blocked and highways were blocked. They waited until acts of vandalism and graffiti occurred. They waited until burning down buildings and burning cars. You're 100% right, and that's why it happened, and that's why it did not happen in Nassau County.
So in just a little bit, I want to go into the actual ordinance, which is not very long. It's easy to pull up. Anyone should read it. Don't believe news stories when you hear everybody trying to on anything. It's so easy to go to the original source, which I did on this, which we should get into. But I do want to call out on the right because I'm also conservative and a Republican, and on the right we're seeing people jumping to 2 different conclusions. One, on these kind of actions where people are trying to push back against the protesters, are saying, well, don't touch free speech. And again, we spoke about that earlier. This doesn't touch speech at all, right? This is about conduct, about what you're doing. And that's clear. That's all over the country. But more importantly, the next thing that some anti-Semites on the right are saying, which we're seeing mostly on the alternative media space, the Candace Owens, the Tates, those characters, where they're talking about, well, this is government just kowtowing to the Jewish community. We don't have to go back so far, because if we remember the George Floyd riots all over our country in the summer just a couple years ago, we had them in South Florida as well. And the differences between the cities and the mayors that decided to have a strong law enforcement presence and those that didn't couldn't be clearer, because those that didn't, those cities burnt down. They burnt to the ground. People that had their businesses, that worked hard, that were trying to live the American dream, their dreams were burnt in flames because the police, at the direction of their mayors or their commissioners, didn't really do anything. In South Florida and Miami, and I want to give a shout out to both our county mayor and our city mayor, by the way, different political parties, when those riots started, and they were riots, so they started right in front of Bayside in downtown Miami, they ended in less than 10 minutes. In less than 10 minutes, because law enforcement showed up, they arrested dozens and dozens of people, and it was over. That was it. So these are issues that affect everybody in a civil society, but somehow people are forgetting that. And I see you, Bruce, and how if your team sent me your bio. I didn't waste time going through all of it. It's an amazing bio. Everyone should look at it. This guy's been involved in every major issue that you think about. But you seem to have that approach also of being proactive. Like we're gonna create a safe community here, right? I mean, that's a priority for you.
Well, it's 1,000% right. And when we talk about the George Floyd riots, where did most of those riots occur? They occurred in areas and communities that were predominantly Black, and they burnt down those communities, and they created havoc for the store owners in those communities. And it's a situation where the people that they should be trying to help, they basically punished. So you can't do this business of governing without drawing lines and making those lines firm. And if you cross over that line, there has to be consequences. If there's not consequences, then you're just encouraging bad behavior. So that's the position that we take here in Nassau County. I'm fortunate that the residents of Nassau County agree with me. It's just common sense. Whether people are wearing masks to do harm, or whether or not they are engaging in criminal conduct or anti-Semitic conduct or biased conduct of any kind of hate speech, we address it here immediately. We put it to an end. We treat all people the same because we have a very diverse community. And basically, that's why we have the safest county in America.
Yeah, and for those worried, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there are exemptions for lots of things that people are thinking about that haven't read it, right? So for your personal health, for safety, for religious purposes, or for celebratory purposes, for different celebrations where you would wear a mask. I'm thinking of the sort of Native American type things or whatever those kind of activities. Those are all exempt. It's about the intent to conceal. And what's interesting is many Democrats have been talking about doing this. If I'm not mistaken, even your governor, Mayor Adams, others have spoken about taking a stand against these masks that are keeping people from criminal prosecution, but no one's really done it. How do you think those folks are going to react, or other mayors are going to react? Are you hearing from other leaders from around the country since you've passed this last week that are looking to do the same?
Well, talk is cheap. My whole work ethic is about action and getting things done. And, you could debate this for days, for weeks, for months. It was just common sense. Mayor Adams has spoken out about doing something similar in New York City. I encourage him to do so. Governor Hochul said it was something that she would consider. I don't know what's taking her so long. This is something that she could address immediately if she was serious about it. We were serious here in Nassau County. We debated it. We had a public discussion about it, and we determined that it was the right common sense thing to do for public safety.
Yeah, listen, so I know you're short on time, but I just wanted to say what we started before we got on camera. So if you research this, the first thing that'll jump out is the ACLU is losing their mind. So the New York ACLU, NYCLU, everybody has to have their own acronym. And they even made their own website about mask covering. They're suddenly the big protectors of violent terroristic protesters all over our country. And I always say, judge me by my enemies. So, I judge you by yours, and you pissed off the right people. You're doing the right things. I think that there is going to be a big domino effect. I really hope that, not just this pod, but all the work that you're doing to get that message out there. I know you, and it's not just to pat yourself on the back. It's to encourage others to get out there and do something.
Absolutely. And, again, we have a great police department. They do a great job. They're very professional. We train them very well. They're educated. We pay them very well. We have great benefits, and they do the job. And the people in our community love our police officers, and they love the fact that we have leaders here in Nassau County that actually back them up. So that's very important as well. So I want to give a lot of the credit to them, because they're on the front lines of making sure that we have a safe community. And I just wish more leaders around the country would get back to some common sense. The ACLU is an organization that I'm proud to have oppose me, because they're on the wrong side of 99% of the issues out there. So if they're against me, I know I'm doing a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. And you're taking the fire for being the first, but I know that the dominoes are going to fall, because you'll stand up to this opposition. We're both attorneys. We know the legalities behind this, and it's gonna be withheld. It's gonna be upheld if it's challenged in courts. I'm pretty confident of that. And then I think after that, people will follow you. So Bruce Blakeman, thank you so much. I wanted to be respectful of your time. I know you've got some high-profile meetings after this, and thank you so much for everything you're doing.
Thank you, Gabe, and keep up the good work. You're doing a great job, and you're a future star. I want to see you back in the political arena.
Soon enough. Thanks so much, and thanks everyone for listening. Make sure to like, subscribe, and do all the great things you do to support podcasts. Have a great one.